So my name's Nick East. I'm the General Manager of the OSS business inside Amdocs. My part of the business is specifically associated with product and solutions around what's called OSS, Operational Support Systems. Basically that's about plugging a service provider's business into their network. So we spend a lot of time looking at how networks are planned, how customers are brought onto those networks, so how their services are fulfilled, and then how they're assured. That's basically the three things that we do: planning, fulfillment, and assurance of a service on an operator's network. I guess over the last 3 years there's been a really radical increase in data demand. So now globally, data and mobile demand outstrips voice. There's been a rough doubling every year, and some very specific statistics which are really quite incredible. So AT&T, for example, saw over an 18-month period a 5,000% increase in data demand on their mobile network. And that's pretty extraordinary if you compare to other industries that are intensive in terms of the expense and the complexity of the network that they have to provide. Then having a demand surge of 5,000% over an 18-month period is pretty extraordinary. If you look at some industry forecasts as well, Cisco are forecasting that by 2012 there'll be around a mobile data capacity requirement of around 40 exabytes. That's about 40 billion gigabytes of data a year, which equates to something like a 40-fold increase over 2009 rates. So really extraordinary increases in mobile data growth. A large proportion of the increase is data. So again, current forecasts are that by around 2012, something like 2/3 of mobile data will be basically video. I think the statistics in the US are 15-20 million consumers now every quarter watch mobile video. So huge increases come from that. Although that said, a large proportion today of mobile data actually does come from laptop users' dongles rather than where people would assume smartphones. So a very large proportion is coming from people connecting their laptop while they're mobile over a dongle rather than a smartphone, but increasingly the content is really video. Data is being consumed in very many locations, principally indoors. So increasingly mobile data is being consumed more indoors than outdoors. So most networks, most service providers would say something like 70% of mobile data is consumed indoors rather than outdoors. In fact, some say 90% of their mobile data traffic is actually consumed indoors. When people are actually mobile, if they're driving their car, if they're walking, it's a lot harder to consume video. It's a lot harder to consume complex data applications. So people tend to consume voice more when they're physically mobile, and they tend to consume much more data when they're stationary, when they're sitting down. So indoor use is much more prevalent, and increasingly also residential use. So how many consumers are watching TV and actually surfing the internet, getting more information, sending messages while they're in a residential context. So yeah, a lot more indoor use, and a lot of it obviously driven by video. I liken it to road traffic. So there are lots of places in a network where there can be congestion, and the impact then is you have a delay, you have a very inconvenient experience. So as a consumer of a service, if large data capacity requirements on the network haven't been properly provisioned, then you end up pretty inconvenienced. You don't get good service, you don't get a good call quality, you don't get good data quality. Obviously, there's been a big impact on the way that service providers have had to respond to that huge surge in demand. So they're looking at ways that they can sweat the assets that they have, expand the network capacity to be able to deliver better service, but also critically ways of driving more revenue, of monetizing the additional demand that's being put on their network capacity. We've seen a response in terms of the take-up of new technology, both in the radio network, so rollout of the latest 3G standards, lots of piloting and rollout of 4G and LTE standards, and equally a big upsurge in Ethernet from a cell site back into the rest of the network. So there's been a very large response from service providers to how they can better respond and better monetize the extra capacity that's put on the network. But a bit like road networks, you provide more capacity, you add an extra lane, and guess what? It fills up with traffic. So there's a fine balance between investing and providing more capacity to relieve congestion, and also providing the service and getting the revenue back and the profit back from doing that, because rolling out new capacity is a pretty expensive business. And really what they need to be doing is looking at making sure that they have careful planning for all of the resources across that domain, very good documentation of those resources, and active monitoring of what's happening. So looking at the performance of the network in real time and understanding what needs to happen. So if there are bottlenecks, then if they can get ahead of those and understand where the next bottlenecks are going to be, they need to be able to plan and roll that out. In terms of the radio network, there's a couple of answers. Clearly more cell sites, and those don't have to be the big cell towers you see on the side of the motorway. They can be relatively small metro sites, about the size of a domestic fridge, down to very small femtocells, providing additional radio capacity. But as I say, that's not the only problem. That capacity then needs to be provided back into the network where the digital content is coming from. And that's really where we've been helping our customers to provide upgrades to fiber and microwave technology using Ethernet, using the latest Ethernet and IP services, which also support 4G standards and the latest radio technology. So that's really expansion. I think sweating their assets is also important, and operators are looking at how they can make better use of their existing capacity, look at trends, see where they've over-provisioned capacity or under-provisioned capacity. Look at the latest announcement from Vodafone Germany. So Vodafone Germany's LTE network, which we're helping in the rollout process for. Vodafone Germany's LTE network will have a base tariff of around €40 for 7 megabits per second. An extra €10 a month will get you 21 megabits per second. So a good tiered pricing strategy that helps the operator monetize the investment that they've put into providing an LTE network, which is a pretty expensive business. I contribute very heavily, but I contribute mostly through work. So I use a BlackBerry. I have a dongle for my laptop, and I'm on the road a lot. So I spend a lot of time in the US, out and about in Europe, and I'm the really annoying person on the plane that the flight attendant has to come to and say, switch it off now, or we'll take it off you. So routinely I'm syncing email, presentations, and that's I would say, in terms of data intensity, very, very high consumption from my laptop on the plane, on the train, and my BlackBerry. I'm also an avid Manchester City football fan, so the apps that I tend to use most are the ones that let me watch football content or keep up to date with the scores. It's another addiction, knowing exactly what the score is in every game in the Premiership. I've had so many. I think it was a Motorola. It was pretty awful. It wasn't a brick phone, but it was a very, very basic Motorola phone with one of those big pull-up aerials.